The silence at my grandmother's funeral was so complete it almost felt intentional. The church was full. Every pew held someone connected to her. Children, grandchildren, distant relatives who had drifted back for the ritual of it. But when the pastor finished the brief prayer and gently asked if anyone would like to say a few words, the room became still. Not the stillness of grief, the stillness of hesitation. People stared at their hands. My uncle coughed into his fist. My cousin checked his phone and then quickly locked it again. No one moved. It wasn't surprising. My grandmother had been difficult in ways that left marks. Sharp opinions, long memories for other people's mistakes. She had a talent for turning small arguments into permanent fractures. Family gatherings around her felt like walking across a frozen lake, always listening for cracks. And yet there we were, standing around her coffin, unable to say anything at all. The pastor waited a moment longer, then another. I realized the silence was becoming its own statement. A final verdict. Before I really understood why, I stood up. I remember the weight of everyone's eyes turning toward me as I walked to the front. My uncle's expression carried mild disbelief, like he was watching someone volunteer for an unpleasant job no one else wanted. I hadn't prepared anything. When I reached the lectern, I looked at the polished wood of the casket and felt something unexpected, an urge to protect her. Not because she had been kind, but because she was gone, and this moment felt too final to reduce her to the worst thing she had been. So I lied. Or maybe I rearranged the truth. I spoke about the way she kept handwritten birthday cards long after most people switched to texts. I mentioned how she once drove 3 hours during a snowstorm to attend my college recital, even though she complained about the music the entire ride home. I described her stubbornness as strength, her sharp tongue as honesty, her controlling habits as a kind of misguided attempt to hold the family together. None of it was entirely false. But it wasn't the whole picture either. While I spoke, I could feel the room reacting in quiet ways. My aunt frowned slightly. My cousin leaned back with crossed arms. Someone in the second row shook their head once, slowly. They knew. They all knew I was smoothing rough edges that had never really been smooth. Still, no one interrupted. When I finished, the silence returned, but it felt different now. Less heavy. More thoughtful. I stepped away from the lectern and sat down. The service ended a few minutes later. Outside the church, clusters of relatives formed small islands of conversation. I overheard fragments as I walked past. "That was generous of her," someone murmured. "Or dishonest," someone else replied. I didn't argue with either interpretation. I was standing near the stone steps when a man approached me. He was older, neatly dressed, with the calm posture of someone used to waiting patiently while other people argued. "You're the granddaughter who spoke," he said.
Yes.
He nodded once, like he had just confirmed something. "I'm your grandmother's attorney." I vaguely remembered him from years ago, someone who occasionally appeared at holiday dinners and spoke quietly with her in the kitchen. "There's a family meeting scheduled this afternoon," he said. "But before that, I wanted to say something." He paused, studying my face. "Your grandmother believed funerals reveal more about the living than the dead." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. He continued, "She left instructions regarding today. Specifically about the eulogy." I felt a faint tension in my chest. "She expected most of the family would refuse to speak," he said. "She was fairly realistic about her reputation." "That sounds like her." He allowed himself a small smile. What she wanted to know was whether anyone would choose restraint. Restraint. She believed the easiest thing in that moment would be honesty, he said, listing every grievance, every disappointment. That was true. The room had been full of them. "But you didn't do that." I shrugged slightly. "It didn't seem necessary." He nodded again. "She anticipated that possibility. Your speech fulfilled the condition she outlined in her will." The words settled slowly. "What condition?" "That the person who chose compassion over exposure would become the executor of her estate." I stared at him. The estate, he added calmly, is valued in the range of several $1 million. Behind us, my uncle was laughing loudly with 2 cousins. None of them were paying attention. What about everyone else? I asked. Oh, they remain beneficiaries, the lawyer said. But you control the process. He opened a leather folder and showed me several documents. I noticed something strange in the pages. Files. Not financial records. Personal notes, letters. Accounts of arguments I vaguely remembered and others I had never heard about. My grandmother had documented everything. Family disputes, loans never repaid. Business arrangements quietly broken. Affairs that had been whispered about but never confirmed. Years of it. She kept records. The lawyer said gently. Extensive ones. For what purpose? In case transparency ever became necessary. I felt a strange weight settle in my hands as I held the folder. If disputes arise during probate, he continued, these documents could influence certain inheritance claims, meaning the family members now arguing over coffee across the parking lot might suddenly care very much about what remained private. The power in that realization made me uncomfortable. Your grandmother believed families destroy themselves through unfiltered truth, the lawyer said, and through secrets, I replied. He didn't disagree. The afternoon meeting was loud, voices rose, old arguments returned almost immediately, but something had changed. Whenever the discussion drifted too close to accusations, the lawyer would calmly refer back to the paperwork. His presence quietly redirected the room. Authority had entered, and everyone knew it. By the time the meeting ended, several relatives had stopped making eye contact with me entirely. I drove home alone that evening. The folder sat on the passenger seat. My grandmother had left me money, yes. Enough to change my life. But what she had really given me was something far stranger. Control over which parts of our family's history would remain buried. And which ones would finally be told. I had stood at her funeral and protected her memory with a careful lie. Now I wondered whether protecting the rest of the family would require telling the truth instead. For the first time all day, I understood why she had designed the test that way. Because compassion and honesty rarely live comfortably together, and someone eventually has to decide which one matters more.